You know where you're going.
Making it up as I go on.
Yes, sure. Yes, right now. Yeah, I'll be on that call.
Good morning, everyone. I'm get started in just a minute. We have a full agenda this morning. We can get time. Bringing the folks inside.
Right, the sounds like that. That's right. Thanks so much.
There's lots of seats in the front. If anyone wants to come up front. Way over. Anyone? Okay, great. I think we're going to get started because I know we have folks joining us online as well. And so, and we have a full agenda this morning. We definitely want to leave time for some Q&A. So thank you, everyone. Welcome, welcome. My name is Marissa Conson. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at NASA. And I'm happy to have you join us this morning for our forum on decarbonization opportunities and resources for developers in Massachusetts. I want to start this morning by thanking Nixon Peabody for allowing us to use this beautiful space with the most gorgeous view. I feel like I could just sit here all day and look out the window. Nixon Peabody has actually been a partner of CHAPA's for nearly 10 years. So that means that they support our work throughout the year, as well as many of the partners you'll see on the screen, supporting our advocacy and our programmatic work. But in addition to that, they also allow us to use the space for our forums so that we can come together and help inform and educate the affordable housing community. So thank you very much. And thank you to our 2024 partners who also support our work throughout the year. It is so important and really helps us allow to do what CHAPA does best. So thank you for joining us this morning. Today, we are really going to be doing essentially an update and a follow-up. Hopefully many of you were able to join us in May for our forum when a lot of these opportunities were just being announced. There was a lot of information coming down the pipeline. It was a little difficult to decipher. And so we had our expert panelists join us in May to kind of walk us through that. Since then, a lot more information has become available and more details about how and when and who can apply for these funding opportunities. So today we're going to go take you all through that so that you can have an opportunity to take full advantage of what is available. So we're going to do an overview to start this morning out with Maggie from the Climate Bank. And then our panelists of experts are going to walk us through scenarios, taking you through essentially the lifeline of a project from start to finish of where you can plug these funding opportunities and at which stage it's appropriate for which project types it's appropriate for. I do want to note that while many of these funding sources are state funding sources, a lot of them are also federal sources, and there may be a little uncertainty on those given this week's election results. So our panelists will speak to that as much as they can today. A little housekeeping, today's forum is being recorded. We have folks joining us online as well. And we also have both PowerPoints that we have that you'll see this morning available on our website. So if you go to chapa.org, click on our event page for today's event, you will see about halfway down the page, there are the PowerPoint presentations available there to follow along. These PowerPoints are chock full of information. They have a lot of links there, things that you're going to want to refer back to. So the recording as well as those PowerPoints are there. We will also be sending out this recording to everyone that has joined us this morning, both online and in person. And with that, we are sharing a survey. We want to know what you want to know more about so that we can continue offering these types of forums on climate and development in 2025. So please make sure you take a moment to fill that out. I'm going to go through some panelist introductions, though their bios are also on that event page that I just mentioned. But starting with our moderator, we have Amy Seitley. Amy is the Undersecretary for Strategy and Climate at the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. We were just talking about how that's a mouthful, HLC. We have Lauren Bauman, the Director of Sustainability and Climate Initiatives with MHP. Emily Jones, Deputy Director with LISC, Massachusetts. Kelsey Reed, Program Director with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Michael Salguero, National Underwriter, Green Projects LISC. Ben Silverman, Residential Program Manager with the Massachusetts Department of Energy and Resources. And last but not least, we have Maggie Superchurch, Director of Policy and Programs at the Massachusetts Community Climate Bank. We will have time after Maggie's presentation for some Q&A, and then after the larger panel discussion, we'll also make sure we leave a lot of time for Q&A, because as I mentioned, there are a lot of details that we will be going through, and we want to get as much time with these folks as possible. So with that, I will hand it over to Maggie. Thank you.
All right, good morning. Try that again. Good morning. Hey, good to be with you all. Thanks for being here today. Good to be with so many friends and colleagues. We're going to take you on a whirlwind tour this morning of all things decarbonization resources for multifamily affordable housing. I will say at the outset, there is a lot here, so please do not feel like you have to screenshot or write everything down because, as I said earlier, these resources will be available to you So we'll do our best to kind of put it all out there for discussion and questions, but also know that you can come back and review and that we're happy to also follow up if those have questions after today. So with that, I thought I would just do a very brief introduction of the Climate Bank for those of you who haven't heard of us or don't know what we do. We are situated at Mass Housing. The Climate Bank was created by Governor Healy and her team a little over a year ago as a way to try and really bring together focused work on housing, affordable housing in particular, production, preservation, and climate, and really thinking about how we meet the Commonwealth's goals for emissions reduction across all sectors, but particularly the residential sector, and more particularly for people who live in affordable housing, low and moderate income homeowners, and those who often have been at the front lines of pollution and other environmental challenges, and where we want to really see resources go as we think about how to transform our housing stock going forward. So the Climate Bank is really set up to focus on decarbonization of affordable housing. And we work to invest both public and private resources in financing products and services that advance the Commonwealth's 2050 climate goals. We've had the pleasure of working with everyone on this panel and many of you in the room as we think about how to bring the resources together to tackle this very complicated decarbonization challenge at a moment when tackling affordable housing by itself is challenging, as we all know. So before I dive in, I wanted to just do a very quick sort of review of what decarbonization is. This is a word that gets thrown around a lot, sort of insider jargon in a way, but really it comes down to three things. Weatherization, so how do we take our mostly older building stock, make it more energy efficient, tighter, improve the building envelope, so that we're reducing the total load, whether that's heating or cooling. Then it's electrification, so how do we get fossil fuels out of our homes, replaced with electrified appliances that are also in many cases much more efficient. And then where possible, how do we introduce clean energy that's mostly rooftop PV, recognizing that a lot of the power we need is going to come from the grid, but they're going to be able to do on-site with our buildings as well. So that's really what it comes down to, and the resources that we'll be talking about today address one or several of those components. And we know that affordable housing developers and operators are about the most creative people out there in terms of pulling many, many resources together. And now we're going to throw a whole bunch at you to think about adding into the mix. So I'll do kind of a flyover of the resources that we're going to be discussing today, and the panelists will break that down really around different stages of development and for different types of development. And some of this we covered in the last forum, but I think it's helpful to just kind of refresh what's in play here. The first, and this has had a lot of discussion, is the EPA Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Again, as a reminder, this is $27 billion that was allocated across 3 competitive award programs. The first was the National Clean Investment Fund, and I'll say a little bit more about what each of these are, and that got the largest share of this fund. The Clean Communities Investment Accelerator and Solar for All. There are a couple of other federal resources that are worth mentioning here. One is the Department of Energy Home Energy Rebates and Home Electrification Appliance Rebates. Massachusetts allocation is $146 million across both of those programs. That runs through DOER. Ben and others can answer specific questions there. Again, that's an additional resource for housing. And then there are several tax credits that were either updated or introduced through the Inflation Reduction Act that also offer a variety of benefits, some of which can be layered in more easily or less easily with affordable housing, depending on other sources. We'll say a little bit more about that as we go forward. So just to take each of these in turn, the National Clean Investment Fund is really designed to help finance projects. So you can see there are a number of different financing products that can be provided by the national awardees. And just to say, there are 3 national coalitions that receive these funds. Each of them have constituent partners. Those partners are putting term sheets together and making these funds available in one or several of the kind of products described here. So pre-development lending, construction and permanent, some credit enhancement, and some loan purchasing. And so as you kind of dive in and take a look at each of these, you'll see that within the National Clean Investment Fund, there are a lot of different ways to think about financing opportunities. The Clean Communities Investment Accelerator has a slightly different focus. It's really meant to help community lenders both build their capacity and build their balance sheets to do more green lending, inclusive of housing, but not necessarily limited to housing. And so the CCIA award winners, of which there are 5, are each thinking about how they will put those resources out to support community lenders. And so that includes the potential for up to $10 million that can be provided as financial assistance and up to $1 million for technical assistance. So various entities across the country and in Massachusetts, this is particularly relevant for CDFIs because Opportunity Finance Network is one of the first that's put resources forward, can apply for up to 10 million for financial assistance and up to $1 million for technical assistance. And those funds can then be on-lent into projects. Again, lots of different ways that can be structured, from below market debt to credit enhancement to other forms of hybrid financing. So that's the CCIA. And then the last of these 3 federal resources is Solar for All. Kelsey from Mass CEC has really been leading a lot of that work with DOER. There are several different pots of Solar for All lending, but relevant to today's conversation, a piece of that is dedicated to multifamily affordable housing for installation of photovoltaics. And there is a requirement from EPA that the project itself have a benefit to tenants that can be provided as an indirect benefit, for example, through provision of broadband. That's equivalent to a 20% savings on the bill for tenants who may not be able to access that based on master metering and utility allowances and so forth. A couple different ways that's going to roll out, both direct ownership and third-party ownership. Mass Housing and the Climate Bank are working with CEC and DOER on this. And again, this is really focused on solar. So that's the kind of big buckets of federal funding. I won't talk as much about the home energy rebates, electrification, appliance rebates, I didn't say it. And we'll say a little more about the tax credits later. If you're interested in the rebates, then can help answer some of those questions. We'll do as much as we can on the tax credits. What you also want to say, there's some really outstanding resources at the state level that are not dependent on federal funds. Some of these are newer or have new funding attached to them. So some of these you'll be familiar with, but we wanted to give you a sense of what's out there. So the first is Mass Save through the new 2025-2027 plan. As some of you may know, this is a program that touches every community that has an investor-owned utility. So we have 42, I think, communities that have municipal light plants. Some of them also have a utility in the mix, so it's a bit complicated, but most communities can tap into Mass Save funds, and those are allocated based on a 3-year plan. 3-year plan is just approved. Something on the order of 290 million there through various kinds of incentives and rebates. So that's an important opportunity. Department of Energy Resources also has a low and moderate income decarbonization program. Round 3 is anticipated to include 40 million. So keep your eye out for that. Again, Ben can help answer questions on that program. Climate Ready Housing, which many of you may be familiar with, again, estimated 15 to 20 million. An existing program, excited to see resources in the Climate Ready program. MHP's Green and Healthy Housing program, which can provide up to 20,000 per project, and Lauren can answer questions there, and others from MHP as well. And lastly, Mass Clean Energy Center has data project planning and data roadmaps, which is really meant to help developers kind of figure out what to do and how to do it in the early stages of project development. So those are some exciting state resources that are live. Again, if you have more information on all of these, will be made available to you. But suffice to say, there's a lot out there to look at and to work with. So before I hand it over to the panel to really get into the details, I just wanted to offer up a few thoughts on sort of in this big universe of things to keep track of. What do you need to know? What are some of the common questions? And then we'll say a little bit about what you can do now. So what do you need to know on the pre-development side for those of you who are really in the earlier stages of thinking about how to integrate decarbonization into your projects? There will be a couple of different ways that pre-development is awarded or made available. Some will come through CFIs, state agencies, and intermediaries, and so it'll be important to track the entities that are providing pre-development funds. And some will go directly to developers and business owners or building owners. Lots of different ways that pre-development will be made available. So grants, loans, direct TA, some of those I mentioned briefly. So again, depending on what you need and the timing, any combination of those may be a good fit. And for federal funds, through Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, low-income and disadvantaged communities will be prioritized, generally speaking. We put together a glossary of terms, because the very specific set of definitions for so-called LIDACs. There's both a geographic definition and income definition for which affordable housing qualifies. So if you want to unpack that a little, the glossary is a good place to go. So what can you do now? You can assess your level of readiness. Think about, if you aren't already doing energy benchmarking, how to start introducing that using tools like EPA Portfolio Manager, WeGoWise. Take a look at the excellent LISC Massachusetts Decarbonization Hub, which has a ton of resources. If you're looking for a consultant, you want to review funding availability. As you're getting into energy auditing and decarb planning, really think about what funding sources are best suited to your project or portfolio needs and timing, given that a lot of these programs are on slightly different timeframes. And consider applying for the Mass Clean Energy Center beta roadmaps or beta project planning. These applications are open on a rolling basis. Again, Kelsey and others from CEC can help answer those questions. So in construction and firm financing, again, just a few high-level points. These are things that people often wonder about or trying to understand. For all of the greenhouse gas reduction fund awards that I mentioned through the 3 competitions, Davis-Bacon related acts will apply to all construction loans. Build America, Buy America may apply in some instances. There's not total clarity yet as to whether that will apply in all or some or which multifamily circumstances, but it's something to watch. Again, as I mentioned, projects that need a LIDAC definition will be a priority. And when you're thinking about performance of a building, retrofit loans through any of these programs generally will require at least 20% building energy reduction. You're looking at sort of where you are now and where the building is modeled to be with the projected improvements. The standards for new construction generally will be higher, and projects that achieve the national zero emissions building standard will be prioritized. That doesn't mean it's categorical, but that is something to be aware of as you're looking at new construction versus retrofit. Again, all these definitions are in the glossary. And then also worth noting that investment tax credits, particularly 4848E, which is for clean energy, are now available to nonprofits through a direct pay provision. So that's an important change and something that's worth taking a look at. So what can you do now? You can review available term sheets. We've got links here. CPC Climate Capital, which is one of the Climate United partners under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, has issued term sheets for several different uses. So take a look. LISC, and I know Michael and others will speak to this as part of the Power Forward Coalition. Again, an NCF award winner, have made term sheets available. Take a look at those. Talk to your senior lender about how all of this fits together and sort of what sources may make sense. And if you're trying to understand this direct pay tax credit provision, Climate United has a really terrific resource they've put together with a ton of information. Again, that's linked here. So hopefully that gives you like a few things to think about coming out of today's conversation. And we are all, as I said, figuring it out day over day. This presentation might look a little different 2 weeks from now than it did today, but this is the current state of affairs. So with that, I will hand it over to the team. Thanks, everyone.
Before we get started on that panel, does anyone have questions for Maggie they wanted to? It's okay. You can stand or whatever. You can just stand and think with Colin.
Hi, Paul Clary. Maggie, in that financing, how come you're not thinking about the PACE program?
It's a good question. We are thinking about the PACE program. The PACE program can be a useful resource. We know there are resources available now, but also constraints related to deal size, senior lender consent. We work closely at the Climate Bank with Mass Development, which was the PACE program administrator. They in turn work closely with DOER on project approvals, discussions underway about how to make the program as effective as possible and capitalized appropriately. So hopefully we'll have more collectively to say on that. The program does exist. It can be a great resource. We've seen less application in an affordable housing setting to date, but that could change potentially in the future. So yeah, thanks for flagging it.
There'll be time at the end. Thank you so much, Maggie. So I'm just going to pull up the presentation for the panelists. And just do want to flag again that this will be available to everyone to have in front of you because when you see it, it's a lot of information. But I'm going to hand it over to you.
that possible, if that is possible, to highlight the areas of federal funding that you feel might be impacted?
Sure,
Yeah, when we talk through,
sure,
or do you want to do it now?
No,
Either way.
While you are doing the presentation.
while we're doing it,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, so we're gonna take you through some scenarios and that will be highlighted as much as everyone is aware.
Hi, everyone. So as Marissa said, this next part of the presentation, first of all, thank you, Maggie, for giving us everything. In 15 minutes, we're gonna slow it down a little bit and go sort of offering by offering, resource by resource through, 4 different stages of project, pre-development and planning, number 1. And then we're gonna go into existing buildings, financing existing buildings, financing new buildings, and talk about tax credits before we wrap it up with how to stay involved and allow some time for some questions. So, Maggie, I always appreciated how beautiful your slides are. These are less so. And you probably can't read them, but the good news is that as Marissa stated, they're all on the website. And they were very helpful for us and will be helpful for you as a resource to really get into the nitty gritty of all the different offerings, which we're gonna talk through in a conversational way. So don't feel like you have to read the slides. So let's start with pre-development. So as developers and owners think about incorporating decarbonization into their housing development projects, you have to start the planning and assessment stage as early as possible, right? So that the scope, the priorities, the timing, the costs, the opportunities all get aligned to meet certain performance standards. It's really difficult to add these things on once a project passes a certain phase in its life, right? So we're gonna start with the pre-development resources, and Maggie mentioned them already, but I'm gonna ask the panel to actually walk through them a little bit. So beta was something that Maggie mentioned. So Kelsey, what is beta? Okay.
We do love acronyms, don't we?
Yes.
So, BETA is our Building Electrification and Transformation Accelerator. It actually represents a kind of suite of programming we've been running at Mass CEC that is focused on the question that Amy just posed, which is, what do building owners need as they want to think about how their building will evolve to eventually meet the known 2050 climate goals that Massachusetts has, where these buildings will be decarbonized. And so we started to look at kind of the different support and resources and approaches buildings would need to reach that point. And a couple of the programs that came out and that are relevant here are our Beta Roadmaps program and our Beta Project Planning program. And what these do is kind of are intended to be complementary and tackling this kind of concept and challenge at different points. So Beta Roadmaps is the higher level, much smaller, lighter touch kind of point of contact. It's intended more for kind of portfolio building owners and particularly is focused on nonprofits or municipally owned buildings. And a resource for them to assess their portfolio and map out what will it mean for your buildings to move towards decarbonization and electrification over time. What are the different steps of that project? How do you meet your goals, meet those electrification targets? Can also help you look at some of the Boston or Cambridge regulations around emission standards and map that out. So it's a relatively light touch report. It does have a minor fee associated with each building, and that fee is subsidized by our kind of role on the program. But it is rolling and open and active for kind of any nonprofit building wanting to go and seek that service. And then that is complemented by Beta Project Planning, which is a much deeper dive, and it is looking more at, okay, you're a building much closer to exploring a deeper project, or closer to thinking about how you might go through some bigger retrofit. And you want to look at kind of how can you approach that retrofit and plan out an actual decarbonization project. So this is, much more individualized, on-site, in-person, customized planning. This one is completely free of charge for participating buildings. This one's a little bit more of a demonstration kind of pilot style program where we have put 15 buildings through this process and we have room for roughly 50 more. where our providing consultants will work with that building owner to develop a plan for their project to decarbonize, for their building to decarbonize. And that could be an all at once, big, deep energy retrofit project, or it could be an over time approach where you're scoping in these different project elements over time. But a deep dive into the specifics of what that project and kind of planning might look like. And that one is also rolling. That one's a little bit more of a dedicated application process because we are selecting buildings from across the entire large building stock of Massachusetts, not just housing, but housing is certainly a key building type that we want.
Thank you. So Ben, can you build upon that and talk about the technical assistance program for existing buildings that DOER is going to roll out in January?
Yeah, so this is going to be a two-tiered, basically building decarbonization assessment program where affordable housing providers can go in and get either initial scoping study, basically equivalent to an ASHRAE level 1 energy audit. And those that either have already done some form of scoping study or have gone through us for such ASHRAE level 1 audits can go through for a design grant or design study, which is equivalent to an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit with a focus on decarbonization. So that ASHRAE level 2 audit is being designed to be applicable for a number of some of the grant and funding opportunities out in the Commonwealth. And the overall goal of this is to just create a larger pipeline of projects with some of these funding opportunities that DOER is putting forward, SDC, LISC, and other groups are putting forward. Especially with the initial scoping study, there's very little barrier to entry besides being an affordable housing project. So you can come into us at midstream or at time of refinancing. But the hope is that the level 2 audit, the design study will be geared more towards those projects that are more committed and have a stronger action plan on how they want to move forward with that work. So we're finalizing a lot of some mechanical pieces of this right now, but we are hoping to be opening up for applications, possibly still in December, but I'm just saying January to be on the safe side.
Great. So Michael, let's talk about GGRF, the federal funds.
Yeah,
And give us an outlook too while you're out. Okay. Thank you.
so those were great summaries. I will concede to the group, our pre-development grant programming is less defined than those that have been described. And I can offer a bit of context about why that's the case and how we're sort of progressing forward. And so now might be a useful time to set some context of the GGRF program in general. So as it relates to where it stands in kind of the life cycle of a government program and the risks associated, the assistance agreements are in place and funds have been obligated to all of the recipients across the 3 different competitions. And so we have access to the funds and we are expected to begin running these programs. I think the start date was technically April, but you know, we are working, we were negotiating terms and conditions as of June. Just to say, this program, the GGRF program and the National Clean Investment Fund in particular, as well as CCIA, are meant to be financing programs. 85% of LISC's allocation is expected to go out as loan products. And I can speak to those a bit more later on. A smaller amount is expected to go out as pre-development grants. Given that relative ratio, since the terms and conditions were put in place, we have been focused on trying to get product sheets out to the market so that you all can start preparing and understanding what these would look like. One difference with our pre-development grants versus, and you can see it up on the slide, versus the ones that were just described, is that we're technically, at least at the moment, agnostic about new construction versus preservation or rehab. That may shift a little bit over time as we start to hone in on exactly what the best use of these resources are. But as I may have mentioned or not, it's 5% of the allocation, so it's a much smaller amount. So we are looking to be more judicious. It's a sizable amount, but we are looking to be more judicious. One other thing to say, this is a national program. So we know this market is very developed and we have outstanding projects that we are excited to support with pre-development grants and financing. But there is also a recognition that this, you know, as you can see from this panel here, this is a much more developed market. And so we will need to be thoughtful and judicious about how we move it forward. Now, like I said, pre-development grants financing, the third eligible use beyond program administration is market building activities. Again, not fully defined and not necessarily my domain of expertise, but you should all expect some type of technical assistance engagement with building science firms and LISC, building off of the great work that Emily and the LISC Massachusetts office have done for a long time. You should expect some of that to support portfolio, that type of portfolio work, and the pre-development grants will be really tied to project-based activities, the types of same types of activities that were described by these folks. So forgive me for not having tons of details on those, but they should look pretty similar to what the others have described. I mean, the universe of activities to get going is known, and so you should expect that these grants would be able to support. The one other thing I want to say about these pre-development grants is the expectation is that if a project is a recipient of a grant, we are expecting that it will eventually move forward into accessing construction financing. And so, as Maggie mentioned, if you're accessing construction financing, that triggers Davis-Bacon. So if the project is not planning to use Davis-Bacon, that's probably an uphill climb to access the pre-development grants. That's the world of federal programming. And last thing I'll say, just from the federal perspective to that question, we fully expect there to be congressional oversight of this program, as there is of all programs. We are stewards of federal dollars, and so we will be doing our best to make sure that we are staying in compliance and meeting the expectations and the mandates of the program. Okay, sorry I droned on. Just wanted to do that full thing.
Thank you. So now let's talk about.
Sorry, I think I have to say one more thing on this list. Sorry. Climate United is another recipient. So just to say, Climate United received about $6 billion. Coalition for Green Capital received about $6 billion. They are relatively industry agnostic. Climate United has CPC Climate Capital as one of its coalition partners, and so they are focused on the affordable sector. Coalition for Green Capital is industry agnostic. Power Forward Communities, our coalition, like I mentioned, received $2 billion and is focused on the residential sector. Rewiring America and Habitat for Humanity are focused on the single family sector. Enterprise and LISC are focused on the multifamily sector. United Way is supporting community engagement. CPC is planning to have a pre-development loan product. Power Forward Communities, LISC Enterprise are not planning to have a pre-development loan product. We are just planning to have pre-development grants, but that pre-development loan product, the link is there. You all can access that. I had no part in putting that together, not my coalition, but just wanted to flag it for you for the sake of transparency.
Did y'all get that? You have a question, go ahead.
My question is just, can you say which of these are just funding and which do come with technical assistance? So like, which are ones where we would go out and find someone to do it and you guys are paying versus you guys are actually getting funding?
Okay, for those online who may not have heard, the question is, which is their technical assistance versus just funding, where then the developer needs to go find their own assistance? Go ahead, Kelsey.
Yeah, so both the beta programs are technical assistance, so we have selected providers for both of those programming who would work with you directly. So you apply and they make contact and start from there.
And similarly for our program, it's going to be, the technical assistance will be provided by select vendors.
And I'll say for the pre-development grants, we welcome if you all have put together a development team and it kind of makes sense across the board. That's a perfectly appropriate use as far as I understand things now. But to mention that we will have that those TA supports, through the market building work. And so it may be the case that over the course of the market building, you put together a development team, and then, we fund the pre-development grant. So I hope that was clear.
Hold on one second. Lauren, we haven't got the opportunity to hear about, I'll come to you next, about another product, which is maybe just financing or financing MTA. So let's know.
Yeah, sure. So we know that the need around pre-development, funding and financing outpaces sort of what we're going to be able to provide in terms of many of the programs that we've talked about so far, right? We have so many redevelopment projects that happen every year that all need this type of pre-development, decarbonization, scoping and technical assistance. And decarbonization studies are the first piece of that and a really important piece of that. But there's additional technical assistance, there's additional design service that you need as you move through the design process to make sure that you can realize the goals that are outlined in the beginning in that decarbonization assessment. And so in response to that sort of need that we've seen in the marketplace, I'm really excited to announce that CDAC, in partnership with MHP, has developed a pre-development decarbonization loan product. And so this is being supported with resources from the Boston Foundation Climate Justice Fund. It at this point is a limited program. We expect to support 7 to 10 or so projects. But it provides a greater opportunity and a larger sources of funding to essentially support that full range of decarbonization pre-development activities at a low cost. And so this is something where I'd encourage you, I'm going to ask the CDAC folks to raise their hands. They're here in the room today. And they're really excited to talk with you all about your projects. I know many of you may be working with CDAC anyway as it relates to pre-development funding on your projects. So this is a really great opportunity to be able to carve out those decarbonization related expenses and reduce cost because it is a low cost loan program. And so this is specifically a financing program. So to the question around, you would pick your own TA providers. The assumption is that you've assembled your project team that includes folks with decarbonization expertise, and that you'd be able to identify what the expenses are in that pre-development process that could specifically be supported by this pre-development loan. So I'll stop there. Just saying that the limitation isn't just for existing building projects. So if you have a fantastic new construction project where you're doing some really innovative things and need resource early in the design process to be able to achieve like really ambitious goals around decarbonization, you should talk to the CDAC team because there may be some space for that. But we also acknowledge that there's a tremendous amount of need in existing building and preservation deals. And so there will be priority given to those types of deals moving forward so that we can really capture those types of projects as they move forward. In terms of thinking about mid-cycle versus refinance type projects, there does need to be a permanent financing opportunity that would take out this loan. So that is a sort of limitation as you think about like how might this apply to a mid-cycle project. So I think it will be a little bit more geared toward those types of refinance projects, but something worth digging into more with the CDAC team. And we expect to be able to roll this out in the next month or so. So if you're working with CDAC on other pre-development financing, or you anticipate to be working with them on pre-development financing, it's a great opportunity to start to explore.
What are the data programs and the DOER program? Like, how do we know which one we want to use?
Difference between data and DOERTA.
Yeah, and chime in. I think part of it is both of our programming were designed as more demonstration and pilots, and the hope is certainly, and I think it has been informing what the kind of TA will look like under DOER's program, which probably has a little bit of a bigger budget and runway for it. So that's part of it. It's also specifically dedicated to affordable housing, whereas beta programs are broader. So it's all nonprofits for the roadmaps, and then project planning is all building types, all commercial building types. My kind of general recommendation would be if you're a portfolio owner and early in your process, go start out with roadmaps. That one's pretty light touch and agnostic across and would not prevent you from then pursuing either one of the other ones necessarily. If you're kind of closer to ready for a project, then that's where project planning or the DOER program would be in that phone.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So let me just go a little further on that. Kelsey, would you say beta is a good entryway for any of the pre-development tools that were introduced right now?
Yeah, beta roadmaps for sure.
Roadmap.
Definitely is.
Specifically.
Beta project planning is a much deeper dive, much more parallel to the DVR one, and exactly which one is the right fit there is gonna be a little trickier.
Yeah, I think that ideally, a project can go through beta roadmaps, or either the beta projects. And I think as it gets closer to execution or actual like development of the project, that's when, our technical assistants will be of most use to put together a more technical design plan for the decarbonization for the project that basically actually over to audit can also be used for applications for both our grant program and other funding opportunities in the Commonwealth and move on from there.
Great. One more question.
Great, thanks. Lauren, just to follow up a little bit on your comment at the end that using those pre-development funds needs to be associated with a permanent financing opportunity. What can you tell us about that? Is that a loan that needs to go through MHP? Are there any preferential interest rates? Does it come with, prevailing wage or devastation requirements? Are we buying? I mean, all of that stuff.
Yeah, so the nice thing about this opportunity is it's a little bit less restrictive than some of the federal funds. And so the Boston Foundation funding has two requirements, essentially, that it has to be providing resources to a project in a state-based environmental justice community, which I think many of you are working on projects in environmental justice communities that would qualify, and or is being completed by a minority developer. So that's really our sort of threshold requirements. In terms of the permanent financing opportunity, we'd be happy to talk to you at MHP about your permanent financing needs. But there is no restriction there. It really is just having the ability to have a resource that will take out the pre-development loan.
Thank you.
Alberta? Yeah.
I just to follow up to that from CDAC, which is that the idea is this is money that has to get repaid, and it has to get repaid in a certain period of time. So it's not something that you want to be accessing if you're thinking, well, maybe 10 years from now we'll have a project and we'll just have this loan hanging out there for 10 years. It does not necessarily mean that you need to come into us with a commitment for permanent financing in hand. We just need to know that this is something that will have the capacity to be repaid within the necessary timeframe.
And I should be specific that the timeframe is 2029 in terms of us recovering those funds and providing them back to the Boston Foundation.
Repay by 2029. See that program? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I would get in trouble with my bosses if I didn't make one more point on LISC's behalf. We also have our traditional loan products. We have a pre-development loan, and so we can pair our pre-development grants with our loan product. Now, the LISC loan dollars are not restrictive, but the pre-development grants are restrictive, so it would just be that the projects would need to progress to put that combination together, but just didn't want to leave that out as another resource.
Great. So we're at one of four of our areas here. We just did the development. Let's go. The next tranche is existing buildings, but a lot was talked about already, and that is probably the most robust set of sources in terms of your dollar amount and maybe even programming. So we're going to move to that right now. But I just have one more question. How many years before your project is coming up for a refi do you think you should start accessing any of these resources? It's different for every project. So beta planning, what do you think, Kelsey?
Yeah, beta roadmaps,
Or
as far as you want.
10 years, 5 years. Okay.
At any point,
Beta roadmaps.
building can go roadmap out what your building cycle is like.
Okay.
Beta project planning a little closer, there's no set time frame, but just, you want to be a little more, anticipatory of a project.
Ben,
1 to 2 years.
1 to 2 years. Lauren?
Yeah, I would just add that as, especially for refinance projects, as you're starting to think about what that looks like, if you're doing a capital needs assessment to understand, what you need to incorporate into your project, that's the time to start doing decarbonization assessments, because you don't want to do this work in silos, right? If you're doing a decarbonization assessment, it should be coordinated with your capital needs assessment, your physical infrastructure assessment. So this way, those entities are working together to develop a scope that is collaborative and represents what you need to do with the property to maintain your physical infrastructure and keep it operational and make sure it's healthy and comfortable for people who live there and achieve your decarbonization goals.
Anything to add, Michael?
That's perfect.
Great, here we go. Existing buildings, so here's a fun fact. There are over 210,000 existing deed restricted affordable housing units in the Commonwealth, according to Housing Navigator, which is our best resource and database for what is affordable and deed restricted in the Commonwealth. And as mentioned, I work at the state, we have a state law, we have a state mandate. Net zero or near net zero by 2050. That's just 26 years away. So this is an ambitious undertaking. So we're gonna spend a lot of time on existing buildings and financing decarbonization. We've already kind of dipped our toes in recapitalization versus mid-cycle. So I'm gonna ask the panelists to sort of walk through the offerings a little bit, say a little bit about if it must be with a recapitalization event or a mid-cycle, the depth of the retrofit, the sort of standards that are being expected to meet. And some of these resources will be similar to what we already discussed in pre-development because they offer both. All right, so let's start with Ben, Mass Save.
So I think Mass Save is sort of the flagship here. The amount of savings on offer, the amount of incentives on offer for affordable housing and, other low and moderate income housing that are looking to decarbonize is quite significant. My cross-board recommendation for projects is you should be talking to lean, if not first, at least after you've completed things such as our technical assistance and otherwise, because that's where a sizable bulk of funding will be coming from, and for those projects that are looking to significantly improve the energy efficiency. Mass Save is huge. Its overall budget for the next 3 years is nearly $5 billion. The amount of funding just for regulated affordable housing is about $270 million alone. And there's additional funding on, overlapping on top of that for passive house, for decarbonization and for these offerings. So go there. Is my general recommendation. After that, our kind of in-house DOER grant, what's we're now calling the Affordable Housing Decarbonization Grant, that is a shorter name than what it was before. So we're mitigating carbon, we're mitigating name lengths. That is $40,000 per unit for those projects that are approved. We're looking for large multifamily, it could be also dispersed projects that are decarbonizing, that implementing and deep energy retrofits, electrification, and on-site solar where possible. On top of that, and I have to, to the gentleman's earlier point, I have to put an asterisk that we are thinking of layering on top of that funding from the home energy rebate, home efficiency rebate program. So the Inflation Reduction Act rebates is up to $20,000 per unit. We have approval at this time from DOE to move forward with that plan. That may change in the next year or so or more. We don't know. So it's quite possible that additional $40,000 per unit might not be available in the near future. But the baseline $40,000 per unit that's DOER money, that's not going anywhere. And obviously Mass Save, thankfully, is most certainly not going anywhere anytime soon. So while there's some elements of this, especially with WAP funding that might be at risk at this stage, the core Mass Save program will remain.
Thanks.
Trying to do a positive, negative, positive stance.
I appreciate it. I should mention, everything on this slide is state resources. That's something good to know. So let's talk about an HLC program that is actually administered by a team of wonderful people, MHP Mass Housing and LISC. just reauthorized in the Affordable Homes Act for a decent chunk of change, so it's going to have annual allocations, a one-time thing. So go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, great. This program was originally created by the 2021 Economic Development Bond Bill. A much smaller allocation, originally 1.6 million. And so for the first 2 years, there were 2 projects each year that were supported. Its goal is to really support and highlight projects, subsidized affordable housing projects in Massachusetts that are achieving deep energy reductions and significant carbon decarbonization and carbon emissions reduction. And so this program in this past year got a significant shot in the arm from the administration and was increased to $16 million. And so we have a slate of 14 projects that are going to be getting resources, soft subsidy, essentially to support incremental costs related to those energy efficiency and decarbonization measures. So what I want to highlight about this program is that for the first 2 years, it was very much focused on deep energy retrofits. So existing buildings that are specifically undergoing significant projects to reduce energy and emissions. Some of those were mid-cycle projects. Some of them were refinance projects. So there's sort of a mix of project type there. So there's opportunity on both sides. This past year, we've expanded the sort of perspective on the program to include zero overtime projects, because what we realized is that it's incredibly important to capture decarbonization opportunities when projects have the chance to, right? And so if you're in a refinance opportunity and maybe you can't do a deep energy retrofit for one reason or another, we still want to make sure that you're developing a plan, the zero overtime plan that shows how your project will get to decarbonization over time within the context of the resources and the project, the capital project that you have planned right now. And so this year we are funding zero overtime projects, specifically for the capital projects that they are proposing now, but those projects are being selected for the sort of thoughtfulness around how they have planned for decarbonization into the future, and that they have strategically decided to implement these types of measures. So that's a really important distinction and something we really want to encourage those types of projects to be applying for this resource.
Thank you. I misspoke. Solar for All is a federal program. Okay, Kelsey, go ahead.
Thanks, Amy. So yeah, Solar for All is one of those federal programs, as mentioned. We are working Mass CC along with DOER and the Climate Bank and some other partners, Boston Housing Authority, who's in the room, on focusing on the kind of delivery of this program for affordable housing. As Maggie mentioned earlier, there are other aspects of the program related to community solar, related to 1 to 4 family residential solar that I won't talk about too much here. The multifamily piece is kind of targeted at both ownership of systems by affordable housing owners, as well as third-party owned approaches, and kind of providing that optionality with technical assistance to help consider that solution. And it's a bridge loan product on the ownership side, and it's more of a kind of direct grant and subsidy piece. I think one of the really core differences that's pretty unique to Solar for All is the savings delivery to the tenants. That's not necessarily something everyone thinks about when they're thinking of solar for their, affordable housing property. And it is a key piece of what our incentive is designed to help accomplish, and the technical assistance is designed to help accomplish, and the way our program structure is being developed is designed to help accomplish is how can you as an affordable housing owner put solar on your property and provide benefits to your tenants with those savings. We're really confident that there are ways to do that as a kind of benefit for the owner, benefit for the tenants, all in an approach that solar can help provide for your building. I will note kind of where this fits in the kind of building life cycle. We're tending to kind of try and focus on mid-cycle properties. If you are approaching a refinance, some of the other solutions being talked about today can also incorporate solar and are probably a better fit for you if you're doing that deep energy retrofit and want to put solar on at that time. It's a really good thing to consider, and there are great ways to do that. We're trying to use this opportunity because it has more flexibility there to focus on those kind of more mid-cycle projects where you just want to add solar because this is going to let you bring the energy costs down on your property. It's going to let you deliver benefits, to your tenants, etc. So that's kind of where this is targeted in at. On the federal funding piece, as kind of mentioned, from a greenhouse gas perspective, we have an executed grant agreement, or DOER, I should say, has an executed grant agreement with EPA for this funding. But there are some kind of conditionality aspects and ongoing engagement with EPA that are part of the program operation and design, and it's pretty early to see how that will evolve or change. But we do have that executed grant agreement for this funding.
Okay. Any questions?
Is there any storage component to solar cell?
Yeah, storage is allowed, but wouldn't be part of the grant or the capital piece that we'd be providing. But we could make it a part of the project. The technical assistance would be able to help you think about and consider that. The reason we're not throwing it in as part of what we're able to fund is mostly that 20% benefit. Adding storage becomes much more challenging to reach that, and it can already be pretty challenging to deliver that benefit to tenants on a multifamily scenario. But it is a possible kind of piece of the project.
And I just wanted to add on the solar for all, product in general, it's not just bridging tax credits, it's meant to cover the entire cost of installation of the PV.
No, go ahead.
So just to give you all a sense of the stack here, Lisk and RMI have been tracking about 20 projects so far who have done deep energy retrofits. So the lean deep energy retrofit program is tracking about $16,000 per unit. The DOER is 40,000, obviously, and then climate ready housing is about 32,000. So when you add those up together, you're getting right around 90. Maybe there'll be another 20,000 for the HER rebates. So you're starting to get to that gap of $100,000 to $150,000 per unit that we're seeing between a typical rehab and a deep energy retrofit.
I'm so glad you stated that. I was gonna ask, can all these sources be used in combination? And it seems like people are doing that.
We encourage it.
Encouraged even. Okay. Let's go to, not grants or subsidies, but financing tools. Some of these were already talked about, not green and healthy housing though. So go ahead, Lauren.
Sure. So a lot of folks in the room might already be familiar with it, but MHP for many years has been running a green financing program called the Green and Healthy Housing Financing Program, and that's our umbrella. About 60% of the lending that we do on the multifamily side is through one of these programs and gets benefits related to the either certification or energy use reduction that's achieved. We've got about 50 projects to date that have gotten these benefits, which totals about 2,500 units. And so on the retrofit side, we have a program called the Green Retrofit Financing Program. And that program has a handful of benefits. One of the biggest being a basis point reduction on interest rate based on how much energy efficiency reductions you achieve as compared to your baseline building. And so there's different basis point reductions depending on whether you're at the 30, 40, or 50+% reduction from your baseline. These interest rate reductions are capped at the equivalent of $20,000 year one benefit. So a little bit of a clarification on that. So it is more than a $20,000 benefit. It's just capped at $20,000 in year one benefits in terms of the interest rate reduction. But then there's also benefits that are coming through this program that include up to a $15,000 reimbursement for costs associated with either a decarbonization assessment or a system commissioning. So that's an opportunity to get some of these costs reimbursed. So let's say you go to CDAC for a pre-development loan and it helps pay for your decarbonization assessment, and you finance with MHP. Well, we'll give you that incentive when we close on our permanent financing and it can offset that cost. We also are offering, we are highly encouraging and offering an incentive to help support the cost of energy tracking moving forward. So you get to select what energy benchmarking software you'd like to use, but we'll pay for 2 years of whatever your preferred tracking software is for that. So a great opportunity again to cover some of this incremental costs associated with doing deeper energy reductions. And what we're really encouraging people to do is if you're your baseline business as usual strategy would get you 20%. Well, what does 30% look like? And once you start to add some of these incentives in, does that start to make financial sense? We really want you to start to do those calculations.
Perfect. So Michael, you did present these programs in the pre-development.
Yeah.
Tell us a little more, and then also, you hit on List National versus List
Yeah.
Massachusetts. Can you say a little bit more about access and allocation?
Yes.
Okay.
This may be getting too into the weeds, but we have, LISC, by dint of the balance sheet implications of an award of this size, we created a new affiliate called LISC Green. And so that affiliate is going to be the entity, that, is operating the program, and LISC staff will be supporting the operations of that affiliate. So that's operationally. It is going to sit as a separate balance sheet than LISC's balance sheet. And so we will have our traditional loan products that will persist. And then this will be a separate bucket of subsidy source, so to speak, that can be introduced into projects in the way that I'm about to describe, in terms of the way that the products are structured. Was that a good enough summary of the interplay?
Good start. I might
Yeah,
ask more questions.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, let me leave it there and see which
Okay.
questions you have. A couple of things to say about the way that this product, the financial assistance is structured. First, we're primarily focused, as I think I alluded to, on direct project financing at the moment. Maggie highlighted a range of different approaches that the range of applicants can take. Enterprise and LISC are really focused on direct project financing at the outset. That may change as the program matures. The financing needs to be, we are going to be really focused on understanding the scope of work that reduces or avoids greenhouse gas emissions. And so we are going to need to have a detailed look at the hard and soft costs, the development budget, in order to size the loan. We do not have a per unit limit at the moment. We do have a range of terms in terms of DSCR that might come into play in hemming in the total loan size. But right now, we don't have an upper limit in terms of loan amount, recognizing that across the country, things may look different and may require more investment or less. Maggie highlighted the kind of minimum threshold elements. The one other element I want to highlight is we do not want to finance any projects that are introducing any new fossil fuel-based systems or appliances. There are exceptions for domestic hot water and backup energy sources, and we can get into those details kind of on a project-specific basis. But based on the mandate of the program, we are doing everything we can to avoid that. If it's an existing building and there are appliances or systems that still have a useful life, those can stay in. There is going to be an option that is yet to be operationalized, but follows along the zero over time approach that Lauren mentioned, which you would be able to access preferential financing if you agree to a zero over time approach, which would be those situations where you have an appliance, it's not the end of its useful life, but you have a plan to eliminate that. Just to note, again, Maggie said it, but everything is pushing toward the DOE's National Zero Emissions Building standard, and so we want to encourage everything to go that direction. I'll just say a couple more things. Sorry that I'm droning on. Because we are limited to funding that specific scope, we recognize that there are going to be situations in which there's senior debt on the project. And so we are open to being, we'll take senior position to the extent that it's available, but recognize that's not always going to be feasible. And so are open to coming in a subordinate position. We will negotiate for the best possible terms for ourselves, but recognize that we have to negotiate with a senior lender. And so recognize that this will need to be a flexible source if we're going to deploy this capital and meet the deployment targets and emissions reduction requirements of the program. This source itself, we are saying at the moment is up to 3%, the interest rate on the money. With lower rates available if you kind of push the emissions reduction and other community impact elements. We are in the process of building something called an impact rating tool collectively with enterprise, and every project, a bunch of data will be collected. It'll be put through the impact rating tool, and based on that score, that kind of will orient the level of impact and then relatedly the terms that are available. One other quick thing to say, Davis-Bacon and related acts, I know I've mentioned it a bunch of times. The costs associated with monitoring compliance of that is an eligible cost for these dollars, so that specific scope can be included. The additional cost of labor for non-decarbonization activities that comes from satisfying that requirement, that is not in scope. So just the specific decarbonization measures are in scope. I think that's all I want to say at the moment, and we'll pause there.
I just wanna make sure everyone understood that Davis-Bacon part.
Yeah.
Can you say it again, and Kelsey, and this would also apply to solar for all? So on, GGRF, the 27 billion, the big tranche of money, exactly what are the Davis-Bacon requirements?
I don't know exactly.
All right.
All of them,
please
but I
proceed.
will, it is prevailing wage. And then there are a range of other kind of compliance and monitoring related. So I think that's probably the heaviest burden is the collection. You have to have a general contractor that is, for lack of a better term, sophisticated enough to understand the program and collect and document the relevant information around prevailing wage. And there's like anti-kickback measures. I'm not the expert
That's
here.
actually not what I meant. What I meant was like, did you just say it only applies to the carbonization or the solar?
It applies
scope?
to the whole project.
Thank you.
Sorry,
That's what I said.
sorry,
Whole
my
project.
apologies.
If you dip into these sources,
The whole project, and one other thing, it does apply to forward commitments. If we can do, these dollars can come in as a permanent source as well, based on the structure we expect them to probably come in at the construction phase, but they can be a permanent forward commitment, and that forward commitment does trigger Davis-Bacon requirements. If it comes in at a permanent phase, but is not forward committed, it does not trigger Davis-Bacon requirements, but it's very difficult to, you need to be a little creative to figure that out, and we're all moving in that direction to figure out, not to avoid. Just to be clear, we're not trying to avoid Davis-Bacon related acts. There are just a range of projects that do this type of work that do not comply with Davis-Bacon, and we think it would be important to introduce the subsidy source in order to support those efforts.
excellent.
Just chime in really quickly that for solar for all, part of the reason we were focused more on the mid-cycle projects is it keeps the solar project a little more contained. So your Davis-Bacon requirements focus on the solar project.
Yeah, if it is
Part of it.
mid-cycle, it is a discrete project. Does everyone, okay. Let's, I know you guys have been listening to us for a while. Let's quickly hit on new construction. We have very strong energy codes in place, the base code, the stretch code, the opt-in. We are also in the process at HLC of updating our QAP, which also, per the Affordable Homes Act, requires all state bond funds and our QAP to explicitly state how we're prioritizing decarbonization and resilience. So that will be coming out soon for comment, should be live in January. So what I'm saying is there's an environment around new construction that is quite strong. And we're not going to talk a lot about new construction, but we do appreciate that there is still an incremental cost for taking on decarbonization scope. And so let's talk Mass Save a little bit about what might help there. Thanks, Ben.
Sure, just briefly, I think as it's noted, Mass Save is providing, per unit incentive costs for, projects that are just, affordable housing as well, specifically those are meeting Energy Star and Passive House requirements. The number up there, is, $37.50 for per unit for above 5 units, and for single to 4 units, there's a specific cap amount for passive house. In addition, there's funding for feasibility studies and passive house modeling available for new construction projects through Mass Save. So I think that's where I would point to, once again, point to folks the most. I would also say that our decarb grant, we're thinking of about setting aside up to about $9 million for some low to zero net carbon new construction projects, with more details to come hopefully before Thanksgiving.
I just want to flag, that the passive house incentive has gone up. So, you know, that's new. And so folks should be paying attention to that, because what you got on the passive house project you may have done a year or two ago, this is more now.
I know, yeah, passive house incentive went up. So look again. All right. Financing on, yeah, go ahead. Oh, yep. Go ahead.
I may be early on this, but, when it's a new construction, small number of units, affordable, accessible. Are you looking at funding specifically for, heat pumps or geothermal? Which usually is less like this.
Heat pumps and geothermal allowable?
Geothermal is allowable, and I don't think that math will always pencil out well. But it is an option, if you wish to pursue it, I believe.
I think we should also, tax credit related stuff, that'll factor in a little bit there.
In 2027, the date third. Does that mean the project should be placed in service by then, or the application should be filed?
What does that mean?
Application, that is related to the 3-year planning cycle for Mass Save. So Mass Save has 3-year planning cycles. The next one is 2025 to 2027. So that $5 billion is going to be either expended or guaranteed during that time period. So
Does the project coming, online in 2028 or 2029, but the construction is started in 2026 or 7, or the application filed in 2027 is it full?
yes.
Great question. Okay, so not incentives, not state incentives, not Mass Save, financing side new construction?
Yeah, so MHP also has a more new construction focused program called the Green Building Certification Program. So similar concept to the one I talked about earlier, where there are interest rate reductions, the level of which depends on the type of certification that you achieve. And we've intentionally structured those so that projects that are pursuing real high levels of energy efficiency, like passive house projects, that are incorporating renewable energy, that are even moving towards the sort of national definition of net zero emissions, in terms of their overarching energy consumption, are achieving the highest interest rate reductions. Also a $15,000 incentive that can go towards anything related to green building certification costs. That's a pretty wide range of things. It could include commissioning, it could include technical assistance consultants that you need to hire in order to be able to get those types of certifications. So yet another great opportunity to sort of layer on, if you're pursuing a passive house, the Mass Save incentive, then you get these interest rate reductions. You're getting benefit in your QAP application, right? So we're really starting to see these different sources synergize with each other and support each other.
And if you have a Davis Bacon project, GGRF, yes, can also be a source.
Yes, and I don't have a lot to add on the structure,
Yeah.
because the structure will be quite similar. There were 2 other points I wanted to add. A requirement of these GGRF dollars being put into a project is a private capital mobilization requirement. So in the permanent stack, there must be some private capital sources, so non-governmental government sources in the capital stack. Just wanted to note that for everybody as a requirement. And then one other note, it's not a product that's listed amongst all this. It can go in a kind of new construction or existing building rehab, but we are offering bridge loans as well to bridge any range of incentives that are only paid once a plant or system is placed in service. So just wanted to mention that as well, with an advance rate up to 100% of that incentive.
All right, guys, we have two more things, tax credits, which Maggie's gonna do, and then how to stay involved. So thanks for sticking with us so far. Let's go to tax credits. You already talked about them a little. What more should we know?
Right, I'm gonna preface this by saying I'm not a tax attorney, consult your tax attorney. But you don't want anyone to miss the opportunity to access these credits. And so I think the one that I would probably highlight first is actually the one that's on the bottom here, 48 renewable energy tax credit. So this is a 30% baseline. You can get more than that if you meet certain conditions related to low-income communities, adders, energy communities, adders. There's a number of other ways that that credit can be increased. Some of that is competitive and there's limited allocation per year, but the baseline credit is not capped to the same extent. So this covers renewable energy systems and storage. As I mentioned earlier, there's a direct pay option, which means nonprofits can complete the work and then file and essentially get the dysfunctional rebate if you have no tax liability. So that requires, in some instances, obviously bridging. And so as Michael mentioned, there are bridge facilities being developed to support entities that want to access these credits and may not have the capital to do so. Solar for All product, for example, is anticipating the ability to bridge some of these credits for solar uses. Does not reduce basis for LIHTC. So this is an important resource to be aware of and definitely something to take a look at. The one above that, the 179D energy efficient commercial building tax deduction does reduce basis, so less likely to be a good fit with LIHTC. But if you're doing an affordable project that does not have tax credits, this is what you should take a look at. And there are energy performance requirements either based on existing conditions and sort of improvement over those based on conditions or as against an ASHRAE standard for new construction. And again, different levels of benefit there. One of the interesting things about that one is the benefit can be taken by the designer of the project. So if you have a design team that can claim the credit and then write down that cost to your soft costs, that is one way to access the benefit, even if you're not taking the credit directly. The last one is 45L. This is smaller dollars, but still worth taking a look at, applicable really for new construction. Again, there's different standards that have to be met in terms of building performance, doesn't reduce basis, could be a nice addition to a project. Again, won't be a large amount of money, but it's not nothing. So worth taking a look at if you're thinking about tax credits as well. So those are the ones we would highlight. Again, take a look at the Climate United guide, which goes through all of this.
Okay, so take us home. Emily, so given how much things are changing, we're already changing and are anticipated to keep changing. How's the best way for developers, owners, nonprofits, consultants to stay up to date with resources and kind of connect peers?
Sure. Thank you. So as Maggie, I think mentioned, the Decarb Hub has many of these resources on them, and we update it on a monthly basis. So you can check that out. It has both these resources, and then I think someone had asked about the technical assistance versus going out and finding your own building science firm. So we have a list of about 20 technical providers who are, we have sample product for them, so we can share that with you if you're looking for someone. So that's, keep your eye on the Decarb Hub. And then our Star Solar program, LISC has been running a program, as many of you know and have participated in for the past 4 years, to really prepare developers to access on-site solar for their portfolio. So it's a partnership with Resonant Energy and MACDC, and we help owners do a review of the technical feasibility for on-site solar and then their financing options, whether it be ownership, third-party leasing options, et cetera. And so if you are already a STAR participant from past phases, we have ability to take a relook at your portfolio if you haven't moved forward with solar on some of it, if it hasn't made economic sense. They're in light of the updated Smart 2.0 incentives that are coming online, Solar for All, looking at the tax credit as well. So reach out if you have any questions about that. And then we'll have 10 new spots for developers for the 2025 cohort, and we'll be opening up application in December. So check out our website for the application form. The energy cohort, again, many of you are already engaged in that. That's a peer learning network and really is for affordable housing professionals to share promising practices, challenges in this nexus of energy and affordable housing. So we cover a range of topics based on your interests and priorities. Our next session, they're all, for the most part, they're virtual. Our next session will be in December 18th. We're going to be talking about geothermal, featuring Joel Wool from Boston Housing Authority, a project there, and it's also a project from Valley CDC. So check that out. You can sign up on our website to receive the invites. And then finally, Liz leads the Zero Carbon Renovation Fund Coalition. This is a coalition of over 200 organizations. Many of you, including CHAPA, are part of this, and it's really a momentum building, movement building coalition to make sure there are adequate resources for building decarbonization broadly for affordable housing and other priority communities from the state level. So we filed Zero Carbon Renovation Fund bill for 300 million at the state legislative level last term. It was not successful, but we will be successful in the upcoming session. We're going to refile that. And we also are engaged on equitable electricity rate reform advocacy. So to make sure that there is a just transition, affordable housing, residents and owners are protected as we move to decarbonize the heating and cooling sources. So if you are not already involved and want to become involved, please just reach out to myself, Lois team, and we will get you signed up. So thank you for your advocacy and leadership on projects and more broadly on the advocacy level.
Okay, so we are wrapped up with the formal part. We'll take any more questions that have not been asked at this point. Also, we have one question. There's ways to follow up with people. And the next, so there's.
No.
Is the lean money, DOER money, Davis-Bacon prevailing wage or prevailing wage?
I can just speak to the DOER money. That money isn't Davis-Bacon unless the project wants to receive funding through the Inflation Reduction Act.
So only if layering the federal sources on top. Good question. We got another one over there.
Hi, Isaac, President Energy, Colorado STAR program. I'm just wondering if this is an amazing rollout of a huge amount of different opportunities. We narrowly focus on the solar lane of that, which is thinking about to help many developers in this room get the bonus tax credit that Maggie just highlighted, an extra 20% off their affordable housing project. I think in light of the recent election, it's worth noting that tax credits are not guaranteed in theory through 2032, since that could be changed in a tax bill next year, starting in 2026. So we are thinking that there's going to be a time-bound opportunity to get access to bonus tax credits for solar specifically in this next year. And I'm wondering, are there, given the breadth of experience in the panel, are there other time-bound opportunities housing owners should be thinking about in light of a potentially anti-IRA transition coming months?
Okay, so those are here. Thank you. I was not saying anything during that slide. So if there is a tax reform at the federal level, a lot of the tax credits that were mentioned may or may not exist. So there's some time-bound sort of need to move more urgently. Does anyone want to talk more about that on the panel about how they might see that playing out? Or I don't know that we are the right people to address that question, but I do appreciate your highlighting it. You said 2026, you think is when the expiration of solar tax credit will happen if there is a new tax reform bill?
That's just based on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, has lots of provisions that expire in 2025.
They would expire,
So it
yes.
seems likely that they will make changes effective for fiscal year 26, with obviously no guarantees as to what.
I think what you're highlighting is the unknown situation around the tax credits. Unlike the grant programs that are contracted, tax credits are credits. So, there is not a lot for us to say about their durability.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add, just because I'm working on the federal. I don't have anything to add to that. I think it's a good point. Folks should get on it. For our program, it does not feel, there's nothing to suggest it is time bound in that same. There are considerations, but it's not time.
Yeah, the financing programs today don't seem to have those types of, time bound challenges.
I'll say one thing that I don't think I mentioned, but the compliance period for the NCIF award is 7 years. Solar for All is
5 years.
5 years, and CCIA, I think, is 6 years. I should have gone in a different order, sorry. So that's when we have to get money out the door. It's not when it has to be repaid. The money has to be into projects and can come back, we can recycle it, but just wanted to say that as a time related.
Okay.
To follow on to what you just said, I mean, the obligated grant funds, certainly the expectation is that they won't, that will continue as we expect, but is there any preparation that the coalitions are doing in the event that something unprecedented should happen to those funds?
Might be early to say that.
We have known both nominees' positions for some time, so yeah, I would just say we've known what could be possible.
And there is that preparation. Okay, so I saw two more.
Eva Rosenberg with RNI.
So what really sparked my curiosity with most of these funds that you had listed, with the financing, there was available at closing. But with the grants, some of that is a little unclear, so maybe with the group kind of trying to explain how an owner can accommodate and anticipate for money that comes at all different times, and what could be used to bridge those.
Okay, so the question was, when funding becomes available, whether it's at closing, early in the pre-development, somewhere else, how can owners actually plan for those different timeframes of when the funding may appear? Anyone wanna take a stab at that? Yeah. Sorry.
I would just say that's why we're looking at a suite of different types of resources that are available at different stages of the project. So to sort of highlight the opportunity with the CDAC loan is that it's available early, right? And so that's your early opportunity. And then, you know, with some of the soft subsidy programs like minority housing, that becomes available at construction closing. And so there's an opportunity to use that money during construction closing. And then for programs like MHP and permanent financing, that becomes available at permanent financing, and you get those incentives then. So what we're really trying to do as sort of an ecosystem is big of opportunities for being able to support the work as you move through the project.
Patrick Thorne, home city development. It seems like a lot of focus is on larger multifamily rental development, existing and new construction. I'm curious if any of these programs would support smaller multifamily developments or even affordable home ownership projects.
Yes, you're right. The focus of this panel is definitely the large multifamily. There are other products for single family and 1 to 4 family. I'm gonna ask Maggie and then to speak and the rest of you, but those are the two people I think right now.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We can spend another couple hours talking about the other parts of the building stock. So on the single family side, Ben can certainly speak to some of the mass save benefits, of which there are a number. The Climate Bank last April announced and is now running a new program called the Energy Saver Home Loan Program, which is supporting income qualified owner occupied properties to make energy improvements to their homes, and happy to share more about that for folks who are interested. So that's a resource. And I believe some of the federal rebates can also be available, so Ben can speak to that. So there are certainly resources, for owner occupied and ownership properties as well.
Sort of briefly, that, Mass Safe has offerings for the 1 to 4 unit space, both for affordable housing as well as the passive house program. I think the new passive house rates are 25,000 for single family, 30,000 for 2 unit, 35,000 for 3 unit, and 40,000 for 4 unit. As a new offerings those projects, as well as funding for the passive house modeling and assessments. The affordable housing decarb grant is multifamily, but the units can be duplexes and triples and quads, so long as enough of them, or I think our smallest number we funded to date was a 10 unit, which was really 3 different buildings. One was a duplex, there were 2 triples and quads. There's some combination like that. And so there is definitely funding available for the 1 to 4 space.
So look at lean, look at climate bank. Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say one other thing to just say, this is not publicly available yet, but some of you may know Rewiring America, which is one of the Power Forward partners, has an online system that helps people to try to identify incentives and benefits available to them for particularly 1 to 4 family homes. There's a whole coalition of Climate Bank and DVR and many other folks who are working with Rewiring to make the Massachusetts database much more comprehensive. Where anyone who's working with homeowners, plug in an address, a fuel type, et cetera, and see all of the potential benefits, federal, state, utility, and it's a very complicated landscape. So just to say, stay tuned, hopefully in 2025, there will be a resource that makes it much easier for everybody to figure out what all those resources are.
And just to add on top of that, Rewiring is working on that, and they are also a recipient through Power Forward Communities, and they will be bringing some type of financial product to support the single family sector next year, I assume. So look out for that as well. Couple other things I wanted to say to your point. LISC only does commercial lending, so we would not, from my perch, we do commercial lending. There's a different segment, but it won't apply here. So we do commercial lending, and so we can support contractors or developers who are developing single family homes to a relevant standard or kind of small scale homes. There's no restriction necessarily for our dollars on rental versus for sale. We're very much oriented toward rental because of what we have traditionally done and who our traditional partners are. But if there was a opportunity, we would invite that and have a conversation. The last thing I'll say, just on the smaller scale to look out for, is the CCIA program, which is the other competition. Because of the scale of those awards to the community lenders, those might actually be better situated to serve that market. They will face the same federal requirements, so it becomes cost prohibitive at a certain scale. And so that's why we're kind of focused on the larger, but there may be innovations, there may be ways. So,
Anyone else want to get in there? Okay, wait. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, Ben Spelman with Oxford Design. Curious, is it fair that none of the programs discussed are currently considering embodied carbon? And if so, any expectations about whether that will continue to be the case, or either entry incentives or restrictions?
So is it true that embodied carbon is not a consideration in any of the offerings, and will that change over time?
So, just so everybody understands what we're talking about
Yeah,
here.
go ahead.
The operational carbon is the carbon emissions that are produced by a building in its operational phase. Embodied carbon emissions are the carbon emissions that are embedded in the materials and the process associated with sort of construction. And so it's a really important point, and it's something that's gaining a lot of traction in terms of the overarching life cycle carbon impact of a particular building. It's why we're seeing a lot of focus on existing buildings, because they tend to be the lowest embodied carbon opportunity, because you're using existing structural systems and other components as part of that. Within the climate ready housing program, we have started to ask project teams about their approach to embodied carbon. And so we are in those applications getting information from project teams about how they're considering embodied carbon. So that is one of the considerations that we use as we think about how those awards are being allocated. But it is not a specific sort of threshold requirement in terms of the program.
Yeah, so the qualified allocation plan, which you have not seen yet, but you will, also has considerations for embodied carbon. And there is a climate bill in the House, I believe, right now that has interesting language about establishing sort of standards and ways of understanding embodied carbon. It is kind of, that isn't a little bit of a next frontier in terms of standards for us in Massachusetts at this time. Thanks for all the questions.
If I can just round out, just to confirm, it is not accounted for in ours as well, just as a little history lesson, when the NOFO for this program came out, they actually detailed that they didn't want to include new construction. It was only focused on rehab. That was lobbied to be changed because it felt to be too restrictive in order to achieve the type of transformation. But it was clear it was being thought about, and so I don't know if anything will change in the foreseeable future on that, but at the moment, we're not collecting any information.
Mike Gibson, TCB. It's great to see so many programs for existing buildings and decarbonization. I do want to say that it can be difficult to, not know what your project scope is when you start, when you have to get stack one on top of the other through different applications. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts on, the best sequence to go through to actually stack those great sources. And if there's been any thought about, say, incorporating those into the one-stop process.
Oh, great. Okay, so stacking, sequencing, and one stop. Let's start with sequencing and stacking. Who wants to roll it all together and say what the advice is?
Like the whole panel's looking.
Yeah. If you're really just getting started, I think you're first in line, right? With
Yeah.
Data.
I think some of the things on the pre-development phase in general probably helpful. The pre-development slide in general, but I think the beta roadmaps and the beta project planning are both designed to be, we don't know what we're doing, but we need guidance to help us figure out how to approach this.
And look at the sources.
And yeah, look at those different sources, map out what those sources can be for the different components of your project. So those are both great sources. I think that is also some degree rolling into the TA that the DVR program is rolling out. And all of that, I would say, has been feeding into discussions around the kind of, more one-stop approach to all of this. That's part of why we look at these kind of demonstration and pilot opportunities, is to start testing out these approaches and methodologies and get some experience with them so that they can inform the evolution of that design over time. So that's what our
Did you want to have questions?
Just, Mike, sorry.
Yeah, no, just to say briefly, I think this idea of starting early and really figuring out what your building condition is now, or new construction that you're aiming at. You can do zero at a time, you can try to get, higher building performance up front. I mean, there are trade-offs and questions as you design and different resources available against each of those. But in the end, the more you know about the building, the easier it's going to be to figure out what those options are. So I would say definitely take advantage of those pre-development resources and look at what can be financed based on sort of what's possible for your building, and portfolio analysis also to figure out where those high opportunity buildings are. If you're not just focused on one or two, is also something to do. So I know that doesn't totally answer the
But
question.
we still have people who want to talk.
Yeah,
Myself and Lauren.
I'm not adding anything
Yeah.
revolutionary, just if you're planning to comply with the State and related acts, you can look at us as a resource, but yeah.
Just a quick clarification, I really meant I want to do a deep energy retrofit through lean, I want DOER, decarbonization, and I want the climate ready housing, right?
You want all of those.
I want all of those, right?
Yes, which we
They all,
told you.
they all
to do,
stack.
Right?
How do I get myself in that pipeline?
I'll get in the pipeline.
So Thinking about that, that's the good news, that all the people on this panel up here today have been talking a lot about what it feels like to be in all of your shoes. And how complicated all of these different, and they're all wonderful programs, but figuring out how to bring it all together can be a really sort of daunting exercise. And so, I would just say that we are aware of that. And we are actively in discussions around how to streamline and make that more efficient for you from your experience. And so, you know, there are many steps along the way, I think, in that process. And I think you mentioned the one step as like the gold standard. It's probably not going to go right there, but we are absolutely thinking about ways to move in that direction.
Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
And I'd say in the meantime, until we have that magic, like one portal, just make sure you get your decarbonization assessment for the property ASAP, that you have applied to LEED and noted that you're interested in the deep energy retrofit pathway, get it in front of them as soon as possible. And then first DOER, the Affordable Housing Grant Program, will be available the next round, probably due in January. And then climate ready housing pre-applications will be due in March or April. And if you can't get to those rounds, then you have to wait 6 months or a year until you get the ones up.
And we are actually at HLC and a discovery around the one stop right now. What does that mean? We're studying how to improve it. And so changes are coming, but not as quickly as, and this is a consideration, not as quickly as probably some would like them to be. Oh, yeah.
Thank you, solar question. We're looking at a 12 unit ownership, 100% affordable. So the question is, when you look at the solar, we consider rooftop different than projects. Because it's a significant impact on the future repair costs.
Ground versus rooftop, 12 units.
Yeah, so for solar for all, both would be feasible, or allowable. And part of the conceptual structure for that program is it's kind of bespoke to the project. So you'd be coming to us, working with the technical consultant to bring a pro forma based off of what roof space you have available, what ground space you have available. That would incorporate things like the difference in O&M for those two options. And that would lead into the design of what bridge loan size do you need, what would the subsidy size you need to make sure we can deliver the tenant benefits and things like that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, the issue is the roof lasts 15 to 20 years, solar lasts for 30 years.
yeah. Yeah, aligning with roof timing and things like that is definitely gonna be a consideration, and particularly when we're talking about mid-cycle projects where that will really vary all over the place. And that'll be something that technical consultant kind of helps assess and tries to figure out if this is the right timing to put solar on the roof or not.
Great, thank you.
Okay, it's hot. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't bring that up.
I'm sorry that the room is so warm and honestly it's reminding us of the challenges of climate. I'm Rachel Heller, CEO at CHAPA. Thank you for coming today. This is part of a series that will continue on because there's clearly so much to learn. There will be so much to access. There will still be more that we need to do. We're identifying a lot of areas of work that will need to be done and new programs and policies that will need to be created. You know, in response to some of the questions about magic 8 ball or the crystal ball of what's going to happen over the next couple of years, this is a good chance to plug the federal forum that CHAPA started in 2016. Interesting timing of why we started a forum on federal housing policy in 2016. It was titled at that time, Doing Business in Times of Uncertainty. So we may dust off that title and bring it back. But that will be a good opportunity for us to talk with both national policy experts on what they're expecting, as well as state policymakers, you know, the people who are running our mass housing and MHP, those who are financing these projects to help think about what will Massachusetts do in response to what is happening federally. And, you know, this is a week about being grateful. You know, I am very grateful for living in Massachusetts. You know, you can see from the panel we had today, how we are a state that is proactive. We are a state that cares. We are a state that is addressing affordability, sustainability. We see the challenges, we embrace them. We work across agencies. We work inside of government and outside of government. You know, just to see so many different entities that are working together around getting these funds out
and also the array of state programs that we've got. We're not just relying on the federal. So there's a lot of hope here, and I'm grateful for all of that. And regardless of what happens federally, really, we will continue in Massachusetts to do what we do best. We are the state that is the first in the nation to recognize same-sex marriage, to have healthcare that's accessible to everyone. We have a long history of affordable housing programs that really shaped a lot of our federal laws and federal programs. So we're in a good place. We are going to keep going. And I just want to encourage you all to get involved. CHAPA has many policy committees where we are constantly thinking about what are the policies we need to make sure we get those 200,000 homes we need across income levels, that we preserve our public housing, we preserve our affordable housing. We are creating new housing that is affordable and affordable across income levels, because we know that people really are struggling at pretty much every income band these days. So please get involved, and also get involved in the Our Massachusetts campaign. This is all about changing the conversation around housing, be a positive one. Too often, we know at the local level, there's a lot of people who will push back and try to stop the kinds of housing that we need. And we need a lot more people speaking up about the benefits and really helping our communities to understand why housing is essential to all of the things we want to see in our communities. So that is a campaign that is a cross sector that is being run out of CHAPA, and please get involved in that. So I want to also say some thank yous. One, thank you to our incredible moderator and panelists. I'm grateful for the deck available, and I can go back to. I want to thank the CHAPA team, in particular, Marissa Crossan, Stan Ferreira, and Jenna Connolly, who have put so much work into the forum today. I want to thank our sponsors who make this possible, and thank Nixon Peabody, because they keep giving us this beautiful space, and it provides us the opportunity to gather so many people and be able to put this kind of information out and take in a lot of what you are asking that informs the work that we do. So thank you all for coming today. Enjoy the beautiful, bizarre, warm weather that is outside, and know that we are all going to come together as we always do, and things are going to be okay. Thank you for coming today.